rain had softened by mid-afternoon, but Greenwood Springs still wore its usual Tuesday gloom. Wet pavement reflected the cold glare of traffic lights, and thin streams of water slipped into the gutters with a patient hush. Down Main Street, past the shuttered bakery and the half-lit barber shop, an elderly man in a faded green coat walked with a steady, deliberate rhythm. His name was Walter Grayson. At 82 years old, Walter did not rush. He moved through life with the grace of a man who had seen enough seasons to know which ones mattered. In one hand, he carried an envelope, a manila folder creased at the edges and clutched against his chest. It held 3 pages that had cost him 2 months of thought, 3 handwritten drafts and 1 sleepless night. Inside was his final will. Walter had always believed that dignity wasn't found in noise, but in intention. And so he walked through the rain with an old soldier's poise, the soles of his polished leather shoes tapping faintly on the slick sidewalk. Ahead stood the Fairview Notary office glass, fronted modern in an unfeeling way. Gold lettering on the door gleamed faintly, Fairview Legal and Notary Services. Walter paused before entering, adjusted the collar of his green coat, and pressed the door open. Warm air greeted him, carrying the sterile scent of sanitizer and toner. A pop song played softly through recessed speakers, its artificial cheer at odds with the gray day outside. At the front desk, a young woman named Sierra scrolled on her phone, acrylic nails clicking lightly on the screen. She barely looked up as Walter approached. "Good afternoon," he said quietly. His voice, though softened by years, carried a certain gravity. Sierra blinked once. "Do you have an appointment?" "No," Walter replied, "but I was told walk-ins are welcome until 4. She glanced at the clock, 3:53. "You're cutting it close." Walter smiled faintly. "Then I won't waste your time." With a sigh, she gestured toward the waiting chairs. "Have a seat. I'll check with the notary." Walter nodded, moving to the cracked leather bench beneath a row of faded local awards. Across from him, 2 younger men in tailored suits laughed over some inside joke. One looked over, smirked, and leaned toward the other. "Maybe he's lost," the man said audibly. "Looks like someone's grandpa wandered in off the bus." The other chuckled. Walter heard it. He always heard it. The small cuts, the casual disregard. But he did not flinch. He ran a weathered thumb over the envelope's seal. Let them laugh, he thought. This is for the children, not for them. Time moved slowly in that room. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The hum of the copy machine underscored the ticking wall clock. Walter waited with quiet patience. At Forge 7, the inner office door swung open. A woman in a sharp navy skirt and heels stepped out, Danielle Crowley, the notary. Her gaze swept the room, then landed on Walter with a slight frown. "You're Mr. Grayson?" she asked. Walter rose, buttoning his coat. "Yes, ma'am. I have a document I'd like notarized." Danielle's eyes flicked toward the envelope in his hand. "We're closing soon," she said curtly. "Let me see the document." Walter handed it over with steady hands. She unfolded the handwritten pages, scanning them quickly. A quiet scoff escaped her. "You wrote this yourself?" "I did." "It's a will, yes." Danielle shook her head. "This isn't valid. It's not typed. No listed witnesses. No legal formatting. This could have been written on a napkin." Walter's face remained calm. It wasn't. "Be that as it may," Danielle said, folding the pages, "this can't be notarized here. We require proper legal documents. I suggest you consult an attorney." Walter took the pages back, gently returning them to the envelope. "Thank you for your time." He turned toward the door, his movements deliberate. Behind him, Danielle muttered to Sierra, unaware that the intern in the corner had quietly pressed record on her phone. "They come in here thinking they're owed something," Danielle said. "Like it's my job to fix their mess." The words hung in the air. Outside, the rain had resumed, a light, persistent drizzle. Walter stepped into it without opening his umbrella. He did not feel the cold. At home that evening, Walter sat alone at his kitchen table. The envelope rested before him, its contents still intact. Beside it sat a black and white photograph of his late wife, Eleanor, smiling beneath an apple tree. Their modest two-bedroom house had long been paid off, the product of decades of careful saving. In that house, Walter had built a life of quiet pride. Now he wanted it to serve one more purpose: to shelter children who had none. For years, he had volunteered at Eastwood Haven, a foster home on the edge of town. He had repaired their back fence, fixed their old plumbing, read books to the younger kids on Saturdays. He had no surviving children of his own. Eleanor had been the love of his life; they'd had no others. Now he wished to leave the house to Eastwood Haven. A simple act, one final gesture of belonging. But bureaucracy had other ideas. Walter sipped weak tea, his hand still steady. Dignity once bruised must stand taller the second time, he thought. Tomorrow he would return. The envelope remained on the table, its surface damp from his thumb, but the words inside untouched. As the kitchen clock chimed softly in the dim light, Walter smiled to himself, a smile neither bitter nor broken, but resolute. The rain would fall again, and so would he walk again into that same office, green coat buttoned, firm envelope in hand. For those children, for Eleanor's memory, and for dignity itself. As the streetlights began to flicker across Greenwood Springs, Walter Grayson prepared for his second visit, not out of stubbornness, but out of purpose, stronger than pride. He rose early the next morning. The rain had passed, leaving the town washed and cold beneath a pale blue sky. In his kitchen, the envelope lay where it had rested the night before, its edges smoothed beneath a stack of paper. Walter had typed the will late into the evening, with the help of an old neighbor named Cal Peterson, a man who had once run a small print shop and still kept an ancient typewriter in his garage. Together they'd copied Walter's words exactly line for line. The margins were uneven, some letters faint, but every sentence carried Walter's intent. Before dawn, Walter placed the typed document back into the manila envelope. He looked at the photograph of Eleanor once more, touched its frame and whispered, "Today, my love." By 9 a.m., the air was crisp as he stepped out the door. Walter wore the same green coat, freshly brushed. His shoes were polished anew, their leather dulled only by years of honest wear. And this time he was not alone. Standing at the gate was Cal, dressed in clean work overalls, a thermos of coffee in hand. "Ready?" Cal asked simply. Walter nodded. "If you'll still stand witness." Cal smiled. "For you, anytime." Together they walked the 6 blocks to Fairview Notary Office. Walter's pace deliberate, Cal's steps steady beside him. The city had begun to hum, shop doors opening, delivery trucks unloading. Yet for Walter, the world narrowed to one small envelope pressed firm against his heart. Inside the office, little had changed. The pop music still played softly. The scent of toner and faint citrus lingered. At the front desk, Sierra scrolled again, a paper cup of iced coffee sweating beside her phone. She looked up as Walter approached. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, surprise perhaps, or mild irritation. "Didn't you come in yesterday?" she asked, her tone flat. "I did," Walter replied calmly, "and I'm here again today." He gestured toward Cal. "This is my witness. I have brought a typed copy of my will in proper format." Cal gave a polite nod. "I'm here for him." Sierra exhaled heavily, picked up the phone and dialed. "He's back," she said after a moment. "Yeah, the old guy with the green coat." Walter heard the words but let them pass. His gaze remained steady, fixed on the worn edge of the counter. Moments later, the door to the inner office opened. Danielle Crowley emerged, the same sharp heels, the same clipped expression. "You again," she said, frowning. Walter met her gaze with quiet resolve. "You said it wasn't typed. It is now. You said I needed a witness. He is here. You said it lacked proper format. I followed guidance from the Veterans Legal Assistance Office." Danielle sighed, glancing at the clock. "Let me see it." Walter handed over the envelope without hesitation. Danielle flipped through the pages with brisk fingers. Her eyes narrowed. Where did you get this template? Walter's voice remained steady. Veterans Legal Assistance Office. Danielle's tone sharpened. Did they tell you this would be accepted here? They said it meets federal guidelines. Danielle closed the document sharply. That's not my concern, she said. We follow internal policy here. And frankly, sir, you're not the kind of client we usually serve. The words hung in the air like a slap. Cal's brow furrowed. Ma'am, he just needs it signed. That's all. Danielle ignored him. This could be fraud, she continued. I've seen it happen, elder abuse coercion. A handwritten will yesterday, a typed one today with a witness off the street, Cal spoke firmly. I'm not off the street. I've worked sanitation here 27 years. Danielle pursed her lips. Still doesn't make this official. She turned sharply, walking away. Walter's voice, though aged, carried the weight of memory and service. I served in Korea, again in Vietnam. I never forged a thing in my life. He stood taller. That paper is my last instruction. It gives my home to children who need one. If you believe I'm a fraud, say it to my face. The room grew still. Danielle hesitated but said nothing. By the copy machine, an intern named Emma Valdez watched quietly. Her phone angled subtly against her stack of papers, recorded the exchange. Emma had seen enough yesterday's dismissal, today's cruelty. Her grandfather had been a war veteran, much like the man now standing before her. As Danielle stalked away, Emma slipped into the break room. With shaking fingers, she replayed the recording and sent it to an email her law professor had once provided. If you witness institutional disrespect, record it. Share it. She never expected a reply, but one came within 10 minutes. Federal Office of Ethics and Veterans Affairs. Confirm receipt. Contact under review. Stand by. In the lobby, Walter sat once again, an envelope resting on his knees. Cal leaned toward him. You all right, Walter? Walter nodded slowly. I faced harder. His gaze moved across the room, the indifferent receptionist, the unseen clients beyond the glass, the fading light outside. And beside him, the envelope remained fragile in form, unwavering in meaning. For the children, Walter thought. For Eleanor. He would not leave. Not this time. Not until dignity was met with decency. The lobby had fallen into a peculiar hush. Walter Grayson sat upright on the cracked leather bench, his coat buttoned to the neck. The manila envelope rested on his knees, its worn corners barely held together by the faint pressure of his hands. He did not move. He had waited in jungles and rice paddies, in VA waiting rooms and courthouse lines. Time did not trouble him. Beside him, Cal Peterson sat in quiet solidarity, his calloused hands folded across his lap. Behind the reception desk, Sierra stole anxious glances toward the inner office. She chewed her lower lip and scrolled aimlessly on her phone, uncertain whether to call Danielle again or simply disappear. In the far corner, Emma Valdez returned to her seat, her pulse still racing. The confirmation email from the Federal Office of Ethics and Veterans Affairs flashed on her phone screen. Her fingers trembled. They're coming, she thought. Now it matters. 20 minutes passed. Walter remained motionless, his eyes fixed on the polished tile floor. He wasn't thinking of policies or codes. He was thinking of a battered back door at Eastwood Haven, one he'd repaired more times than he could count. He was thinking of little Noah, age 6, who had asked him last month, Mr. Grayson, is this your house? And Walter had smiled. No son, not yet. But one day, maybe. That promise had brought him here, and no insult would send him away. At 4:37 p.m., the glass doors to the office swung open. A tall woman in a gray suit entered, accompanied by 2 individuals in navy blue lanyards marked Federal Oversight Division. Their presence turned heads instantly. Sierra froze mid-text. Cal straightened in his chair. Even Danielle, emerging from the back hallway, stopped in her tracks. The lead woman stepped forward. Ms. Valdez, she asked. Emma rose shakily. Yes. I'm Naomi Pierce, Special Counsel, Federal Office of Ethics and Veterans Affairs. May we speak privately? Emma glanced at Walter, her throat tight. She nodded. Danielle's face drained of color. What is this? She demanded. Counsel Pierce turned calmly. We are here in response to a formal report of discriminatory practice and improper obstruction regarding the processing of a veteran's testamentary document. Danielle sputtered. I followed policy. Pierce's gaze sharpened. No internal policy supersedes federal statute, Ms. Crowley. You know that. Emma and the agents disappeared into the break room. In the lobby, tension hung thick as wire. Cal leaned toward Walter. They're here for you. Walter exhaled softly. They're here for the truth. Minutes stretched thin. The fluorescent light seemed too bright. Every movement felt amplified. At 5:02 p.m., the front door opened once more. A black SUV rolled into the reserved space. The driver opened the door and Marie Grayson stepped out. Walter's daughter, Deputy Director of Legal Affairs for the U.S. Veterans Accountability Office. She wore tailored navy slacks, a crisp blouse, and low heels that clicked sharply against the tile. Her ID badge gleamed beneath the office lights. Walter stood as she entered, his back straight, despite the dull ache in his joints. You didn't have to come, he said softly. I always come, Marie replied. She approached the front desk, her voice calm but resonant. Please inform your notary that a legal observer representing the Federal Veterans Protection Act is present. Danielle reappeared pale and stiff. Ms. Grayson, there's no need for escalation. Marie held up a sealed letter stamped with the Department of Justice insignia. Consider this your instruction. Danielle's breath caught. But you shredded my father's handwritten will. You refused to notarize his typed document. You levied false allegations of fraud against a decorated war veteran. Marie turned to the room. Her voice, low and unwavering, filled the space. No policy excuses, discrimination wrapped in protocol. Emma re-entered, her eyes meeting Marie's with quiet gratitude. Walter stood silently, his eyes shining with a fierce, quiet pride. Marie approached him. Do you have the document? Dad Walter nodded and handed her the envelope, now softened by countless moments of hope and defiance. Marie placed it gently on the counter and faced Danielle. You will witness this now. You will notarize it, or I will file an injunction citing violations under the Veterans Assistance and Accountability Reform Act. Danielle's hands shook as she retrieved her notary seal. I'll witness, Emma said, her voice steady. So will I, Cal added, stepping forward. The pages were signed, stamped, logged. But the moment was not finished. The front doors opened once more. 6 children from Eastwood Haven entered, guided by their foster mother. In their hands were painted thank you cards. A small girl with dark curls approached Walter, holding a crayon drawing of a house. We heard you're giving us your home, she whispered shyly. Walter's voice broke slightly. It's always been yours. A hush fell over the room. Marie knelt beside the girl. Would you like to help us pick a new paint color for your room? The girl beamed. Around them, clients stood and clapped softly. Even Sierra lowered her phone, her expression unreadable. Danielle stepped back, eyes lowered. Emma wiped away a tear. Marie turned toward her father, voice full of quiet pride. You always taught me the value of standing tall. Now the world's learning what that means. And for the first time in 2 long days, Walter Grayson smiled, not because the system had worked, but because he had. As dust settled over Greenwood Springs, the notary seal gleamed faintly on the final page of Walter's will, a simple mark that now carried the weight of legacy and the promise of a home for those who needed it most. 1 week later, the old 2-bedroom house on Maple Grove Lane stood bathed in the golden warmth of a late spring sun. Its shutters, once chipped and peeling, had been freshly painted a soft blue. The porch railings gleamed with new white paint, still faintly scented of varnish. A handmade sign hung by the door, lovingly lettered in bold, playful strokes, "The Grayson House." Inside, laughter echoed. Children's voices filled rooms that had long sat in silence. Bunk beds lined one wall, adorned with mismatched quilts and crayon drawings. A worn but polished oak dining table stretched across the kitchen, now flanked by chairs of every size. Above the mantel in the living room hung two framed items. One was the notarized Willett's gold seal catching the afternoon light, its signature bearing the unshakable resolve of a man who had refused to be silenced. Beside it was a photograph taken just days earlier. Walter Grayson, his daughter Marie Young, Emma Valdez, and six bright-eyed children from Eastwood Haven, their handmade cards held proudly in small hands. Beneath the photo, an inscription read, "Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you choose to share while you're still here." Walter sat in the kitchen that afternoon, a cup of black coffee warming his weathered hands. On the table before him were scattered papers, sketches of new play structures, room assignments, a crayon drawing of a dog named Captain Biscuit. The foster home director had offered Walter a quiet room in the back of the house, but he had gently declined. "This was never about me," he had said. Instead, he visited each day tools in hand, a steady presence in a home now alive with purpose. To the children, he was simply Mr. G. Some still didn't fully understand what he had done for them, but they didn't need to. He was there, and that was enough. Outside, the yard had transformed. Where silence once lingered, a sandbox now brimmed with bright plastic toys. A tire swing hung from the old elm tree. Laughter rang out beneath the branches. Walter stepped onto the porch, leaning against the new railing. His joints still ached, a dull, familiar throb, but his spirit stood straighter than it had in years. Marie joined him, two mugs of coffee in hand. "You know," she said softly, "I think you taught more people in 1 week than I have in 10 years of public service." Walter chuckled, the sound low and warm. "I just showed up," he replied. "That's all." "No," Marie said, turning toward him. "You reminded the world how to see." They stood in silence, watching as the children chased each other through the grass. Inside Fairview Notary office, changes had come too. Danielle Crowley had been placed on administrative leave pending review. The Federal Oversight Division had opened a formal investigation. Sierra was no longer at the front desk, and Emma Valdez had been offered a permanent position, legal advocacy liaison for underserved clients. Her first initiative launched that week, free weekly notarizations for veterans and seniors. On the inaugural day, Emma posted a simple message on the office bulletin board, "In memory of those who fought not for recognition, but for dignity. We see you." She thought often of Walter, the quiet way he had stood, the worn envelope in his steady hands. It was not defiance that had carried him. It was duty to memory, to family, to the belief that a man's worth could not be measured in ink or attire. On Saturday morning, Emma visited the Grayson house. The children greeted her with handmade cards and bright laughter. Walter met her at the door, offering a rare, genuine smile. "Come in," he said. "You're always welcome here." Inside, the living room buzzed with life. The walls bore fresh paint in soft yellows and greens. A bookshelf, newly installed, overflowed with donated books. Emma paused beneath the framed will. Her eyes lingered on the seal on the signature that had once seemed so fragile beneath the weight of indifference. She turned to Walter. "You gave them a home," she said softly. Walter looked out at the children, their voices filling the house with unrestrained joy. "No," he replied. "They gave me something too." He let the words hang there, voice steady, a reason to be remembered for something more than silence. As the sun dipped lower, casting long golden beams through the kitchen window, Walter and Marie sat quietly watching the children play. In that moment, Walter Grayson was not simply a veteran, not merely a man in a green coat with a battered envelope. He was a builder of homes, a restorer of faith, and the quiet echo of what dignity sounds like when it is finally heard.